There are truths that were once locked away in classified archives. There are people who sacrifice their careers, even their lives, just to speak out. And there are lessons you'll never find in textbooks, yet they can change the way you see the world. Today, we embark on a journey to uncover 5 true stories that were once hidden in the history of America. Each story is a truth, and each truth, a lesson in survival. If you're drawn to deep insights, lessons on inner strength, truth, and the path to awakening, hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell. Because here, we tell the stories no one dares to tell, but everyone needs to hear. Have you ever wondered if your mind could be controlled without you even knowing? There was a time in American history when people believed if you could control thoughts, you could control the world. And from that belief, one of the darkest chapters in U.S. intelligence history was born, under the codename MKULTRA, the birth of a program that never existed on paper. In 1953, at the height of the Cold War, the CIA quietly formed a top-secret unit. Its goal? To discover how to bend human consciousness, to extract, manipulate, or erase someone's memories. No contracts, no consent, no ethical boundaries. They wanted to know how to make someone spill every secret, how to make someone forget who they are. And is it possible to create a mindless assassin, one who acts only upon hearing the right trigger? The answers lay within a series of experiments that, had they not been leaked, Americans might never have known that they were the lab rats. LSD, a hallucinogen and a real-life nightmare. For nearly 20 years, MK Ultra conducted experiments across more than 80 hospitals, universities, and psychiatric facilities in the U.S. The test subjects included unaware hospital patients, inmates serving sentences, students promised academic research opportunities, and even innocent civilians on the street. They were injected or fed LSD, mescaline, amphetamines, barbiturates, all without knowledge or consent. Some were locked in soundproof rooms, tortured with blinding lights, deafening noise, and interrogated with repeated phrases thousands of times. One man, Frank Olson, a military scientist, was secretly dosed with LSD during a meeting. 9 days later, he jumped from a hotel window. The CIA called it an accident. Years later, his son reopened the case and discovered his father didn't jump. He was pushed, destroying the evidence, as if it never happened. In 1973, fearing exposure, the then CIA director ordered the destruction of all MK Ultra documents. Tens of thousands of records were burned, as if the program had never existed. But a few files were overlooked, tucked away in a storage facility in Maryland. Thanks to that, in the late 1970s, the U.S. Congress held a public hearing. The program was exposed. Public outrage followed. But no one went to jail. No official apology was made to the victims. Only one statement remains in the congressional records. MKULTRA represents the most unethical research ever conducted on American soil. The mind, the most dangerous weapon. MK Ultra is living proof that we live in a world where truth can be buried and people can be turned into tools within hours. You can lose money, a house, or a job. But once your mind is stolen, you are no longer yourself. That's why learning to control from within is more vital than ever. Ask yourself every day, am I thinking my own thoughts? Or the thoughts someone wants me to think? Am I living or merely reacting? A lesson from the darkness. MK Ultra was not just an experiment. It was a warning. Mental freedom is the most valuable thing we have, and also the easiest to steal. In a world overflowing with information, true power doesn't lie in knowing everything. It lies in knowing what to believe and what to question. You may not live in the Cold War. You're not being injected with LSD. But every day you are surrounded by noise, bias, media pressure, and subtle manipulation. And if you're not careful, you'll lose yourself. Remember, true freedom begins from within. And if you want to live a life that is meaningful, awakened, and strong, keep your mind clean, like the morning wind. No one can control you, unless you give up control of yourself. Project 112. When the U.S. military secretly tested biological weapons on its own men, there's one thing every soldier believes without question: that they're fighting for truth, for justice, and that their country would never betray them. But what if one day you discovered that the very uniform you wear was the ticket to becoming a test subject, without permission, without warning? Project 112 is one of the coldest, most silent, and ruthless secrets in the history of the U.S. military, and it remained hidden in the shadows for nearly 40 years. An experiment where no one knew they were being experimented on. In 1962, under the direction of the U.S. Department of Defense, a top-secret program called Project 112 was launched. The goal: to test biological and chemical weapons in real-world conditions, to assess their lethality, spread, and response strategies in modern warfare. But the most terrifying part? The tests weren't done in labs. They were done on people. Thousands of American soldiers stationed in the Pacific, across Asia, and even within U.S. borders were unknowingly subjected to these tests. Operation Shad. When warships became floating labs, within Project 112, a sub-project named Operation Shad, Shipboard Hazard and Defense, was initiated. Here's what happened. Simulated biological agents like Serratia marcescens and Bacillus globigii were released on naval ships. Soldiers were not informed. No protective equipment was given. No treatment followed the exposure. One shocking example was the USS Granville S. Hall, where hundreds of sailors were exposed to nerve agent simulants, just to observe how long they might survive a mock biological attack. One former sailor recalled, "We were coughing, struggling to breathe, exhausted for days. But no one told us anything. Years later, after leaving the service, I found out I had been a test subject. This wasn't just simulation. People died. Military officials initially claimed these were harmless bacteria, but in reality, many victims later developed severe respiratory diseases, neurological damage, and cancer. In 1966, researchers even released bacteria into New York's subway system, testing how it would spread in a dense urban environment. The result? The bacteria spread across almost the entire system in a matter of hours. People suffered coughing, fever, sore throats, all dismissed as seasonal allergies. No one was arrested. No one was held accountable. And the records of Project 112 remained classified for 35 more years. The truth finally came out, but too late for many. Not until 2002, after relentless pressure from veterans and investigative journalists, did the Pentagon finally admit the existence of Project 112 and Operation Shad. By then, many veterans had died from unexplained illnesses, developed lung, liver, and nerve-related cancers, lost fertility, and worst of all, received no help because they were never officially listed as victims. One elderly veteran testified before Congress, "I was willing to die for my country, but not to die silently, because I was experimented on without my knowledge. The Lesson of Blind Trust Project. 112 isn't just a stain on military history. It's a warning about what happens when humans are given unchecked power. When ethics are discarded, power experiments on conscience. And when we stop asking questions, others start using us as the answer. A deeper meaning. Awaken and choose. You don't have to be a soldier to see how this story connects to your life. Because today, we're all being experimented on in subtle ways, in a world full of pre-decided choices. What to eat, what to believe, what to fear, and what to dream of. So, if you want to truly own your life, start by asking questions, listening to your inner voice, and refusing to let anyone else define your destiny. Project 112 is a page of history many want to forget. But if we don't reflect on what happened, how will we prevent it from happening again? In a world ripe for manipulation, trust must be guided by wisdom, and wisdom always begins with an independent mind. 3. The Tuskegee Experiment. When science forgot humanity. If there's something more terrifying than war or biological weapons, it's science without ethics. The Tuskegee Experiment is one of the most horrifying examples of how a society can use knowledge to hide crimes for nearly half a century. And the most painful part? Those who were harmed had no idea they were being harmed. The Syphilis Observation Study in Tuskegee. In 1932, the U.S. Public Health Service, PHS, launched a long-term study on syphilis, a sexually transmitted disease that was widespread at the time. They chose Tuskegee, a small town in Alabama where most residents were African American, poor, uneducated, and with little access to health care. Over 600 black men were recruited with promises of free medical exams, free treatment, and special care from the government. But it was all a cover. In reality, those infected with syphilis received no treatment. They were observed like live test subjects. No penicillin. Even when it could have saved lives by the 1940s, penicillin had already been recognized as an effective cure for syphilis. But for the men in the Tuskegee study, the drug was withheld. Instead, researchers hid the existence of the treatment, intentionally allowed the disease to progress to observe its natural course. Even marked patient files in hospitals to prevent other doctors from treating them. Death in darkness. And the next generation suffered. The consequences didn't stop with the original test subjects. Many wives were infected. Many children were born with birth defects, passed down from untreated syphilis in their parents. In total, 128 men died directly from syphilis or its complications. Hundreds lived with the disease, and thousands more lives were indirectly impacted. Lives that were never counted, all of it, in the name of science. The truth exposed. Thanks to a local reporter. In 1972, 40 years after the study began, a former healthcare worker, haunted by what he had witnessed, secretly leaked information to the press. Journalist Jean Heller from the Associated Press led an investigation and published the first public report on the study. The nation was shocked. Congress held hearings. President Nixon was harshly criticized. The program was shut down immediately. A belated apology from the U.S. government. It wasn't until 1997, 65 years after the study began, that President Bill Clinton issued a formal apology. The United States government did something that was wrong, deeply, profoundly, morally wrong. Nothing can undo what was done. But today, we say to the survivors and their families, we are sorry. To our nation's African-American citizens, we are deeply sorry. But that apology couldn't bring the dead back. It couldn't erase the 40 years these men were seen as data, not human beings. When science loses its soul. Tuskegee isn't just a story of the past. It's a mirror held up to the present, showing how knowledge without ethics becomes a weapon. A society that doesn't honor human dignity will, in the name of progress, destroy its very soul. A lesson for our time. You may not be a scientist. You may not be the victim of an experiment. But every day, you face choices between results and conscience. So what will you choose? Success? At any cost? Or values? Above achievements? Maybe you can't change the world overnight. But you can hold on to one thing. Your humanity. Because in every era, between intellect and darkness, compassion is the final line we must never cross. Apollo 1. The forgotten tragedy of the space race. In 1969, millions of Americans cheered as Neil Armstrong stepped onto the moon. But few mention the 3 men who died before that moment, in their cockpit, because of a mistake that could have been avoided. This is the story of Apollo 1, and the sacrifice that remained hidden for years. A race and pressures beyond imagination. In the 1960s, at the peak of the Cold War, the United States and the Soviet Union were locked in an intense space race. President John F. Kennedy famously declared, "We choose to go to the moon not because it is easy, but because it is hard." The pressure on NASA was unimaginable. The mission had to succeed at all costs. Any delay was seen as a loss to the Soviet Union. And so, Apollo 1, the first crewed mission of the Apollo program, was pushed forward at breakneck speed. Tragedy strikes. During a routine test on January 27, 1967, 3 veteran astronauts entered the command module of Apollo 1. Gus Grissom, Ed White, Roger Chaffee. They were just conducting a routine ground test. No launch, no countdown, just a systems check. But minutes in, a small spark ignited the pure oxygen atmosphere under high pressure. The fire engulfed the capsule in less than 17 seconds. The complex hatch design made it impossible to escape in time. All 3 men, heroes, were burned alive in the very spacecraft they trusted. The truth hidden. For just one reason. Immediately after the fire, NASA released no technical details. The media called it an unfortunate accident. No one was blamed. But internal engineers already knew. Wires weren't properly insulated. Pure oxygen in a sealed capsule was extremely flammable. The cabin was too cramped, the door opened inward. Impossible to escape quickly. These issues had been reported multiple times. But due to political pressure, budget concerns, and deadlines, the warnings were ignored. They didn't die by accident. They died in silence. Just days before his death, Gus Grissom hung a lemon inside the Apollo capsule, a sarcastic symbol. "This ship is a lemon." No one listened. Ed White told his wife, "If anything happens to me, don't let it be buried in a committee meeting." Roger Chaffee, the youngest of the 3, was about to take his first trip into space, and tragically, his last. What changed after their death? Their loss forced NASA to redesign the entire safety system, replace the cabin atmosphere, simplify the emergency hatch design. Soon after, Apollo 11 successfully landed on the moon. But there would have been no moon landing without the 3 who burned in silence. A lesson from the flames. Apollo 1 is a painful reminder of one simple truth. When ego and reputation matter more than human lives, tragedy is inevitable. And behind every great success story are those who dared to pay the price. Awakening through tragedy. We may never travel to space, but each day, we too chase goals while losing sight of who we are. Stay silent in the face of wrong. Out of fear. Cover up mistakes. Just to protect appearances. Don't let your silence destroy something precious. These three men didn't die because they weren't good enough. They died because the world around them chose silence over change. Today, remember them. Not just as astronauts, but as a reminder that some things are worth speaking up for, even when the price is everything.